Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandages here with your tropical update. Today we've got a lot to talk about once again. Major Hurricane Fiona, Category 4 hurricane moving north very slowly away from the Turks and Caicos. Tropical Storm Gaston in the North Atlantic and, of course, Invest 98L. But that's not all. There's actually two other tropical waves out there that have low to moderate chances of developing as well. Today is September 21st. 2022, we're 11 days out from the peak of the season, which was on September 10th. Still very active out there. Here's an updated scorecard. The Atlantic trying to catch up, but to the East Pacific, they're already double our amount in terms of named storms at 14. We are now at 7 with the addition of Gaston, which was named yesterday. All right, here's a look at the overall basin. A lot of activity going on here. Hurricane Fiona, Category 4, building north likely to the west of Bermuda, and then to the Atlantic Canada. Tropical Storm Gaston, another wave coming off the coast of Africa, 50% chance of developing. Another wave in between that and 98L, there's a 30% chance. And then, of course, 98L, a high-interest tropical wave, as is forecast to head into the Caribbean, building into a very fertile environment for development. Let's start off with Fiona, Category 4 storm. First Category 4 storm since Hurricane Sam last late September and early October, so it's been quite some time. It's been a named storm for a week now, 7 days, and it's the strongest it's been yet. It's moving to the north at 8 miles per hour, sustained winds of 130 miles per hour, so puts it at a low-end Category 4, but nonetheless a Category 4. Thankfully, it is now away from land, and I want you to take note of what's going on here as we play out the infrared satellite loop. Notice a rather large eye. That's very obvious on satellite imagery, and then as we build north over the last 12 hours, it's beginning to contract and becoming much smaller. I think that we are seeing another eye wall replacement cycle, and why I lean towards that solution here is because there hasn't been any change in its intensity in the most latest update. There's been no drop in pressure, no increase in wind speed, and typically what comes with an eye wall replacement cycle is a plateau of intensity before the actual eye wall collapses and builds in and collapses on itself, and then we see a period of plateau of intensity, and then a larger eye wall builds in to replace it. So this is very common and very strong, intense hurricanes. I think that's what we're seeing here. Here's how it looks on visible satellite imagery. Very impressive. You can see that cleared out warm eye to the south, lifting north, beginning to fill on in just a little bit. As I mentioned, I think it's going through that eye wall replacement cycle. Bigger picture, very interesting. Just about 350 miles off to the west, Nassau, Bahamas, a beautiful day with a northeasterly breeze. 350 miles off to the east, you have a major Category 4 hurricane. That's how these things work. It's very localized and with its impacts. Thankfully, again, as I mentioned, is moving north of the Turks and Caicos. Still moving very slow, though, only at 8 miles per hour. It is forecast to pick up that forward speed, but so far has not done so. Here's a look at water vapor imagery. We're looking for dry air that's going to get pulled into the circulation. Not happening with this. It's certainly doing a great job of walling itself off from any of that dry air entrainment. So where's it going here? Pretty much due north and then northeast. Again, with the speed picking up, you see the increments spaced out a little bit farther. So Thursday night at 7, 12 hours later, Friday morning at 7 a.m., it should be just to the north of Bermuda. Right now, they are under a tropical storm warning and a hurricane watch. Right now, that cone is not including you, and it looks with the latest models that the strongest of the winds should stay off to your west-northwest. So that is the best case scenario. However, a little wobble on that track could have some big implications for you. Then it builds north, maintains major hurricane status by Friday night, still 120 mile per hour winds that far north, and as it makes it into Nova Scotia, Labrador, Newfoundland, we've got winds still of 100 miles per hour, and that wind field likely very large. Very unusual to see that strong of a storm making it that far north. This will likely bring historic impacts to Atlantic Canada. All right, here's a look at those tropical alerts. The only alerts that we have up in the Atlantic right now is over Bermuda, and that's for that tropical storm warning, and below this is a hurricane watch that's up for imminent impacts likely from Fiona as it lifts north. So what does the wind field look like? Notice as it lifts north, it expands a little bit as it gains latitude. Here's a look at forecast winds. There's Bermuda. By the time we get to Friday morning, as it's located just to the west-northwest, likely seeing Category 1 winds, maybe even Category 2 force winds up and over 100 miles per hour are possible, but the core of the strongest winds may stay just off to your west, hopefully. Then it builds north, and look at how large the wind field is here. Even this model has tropical storm force winds making it into northern and central Maine, up through Nova Scotia, St. John's, Labrador, Cape Breton. All these areas are going to be experiencing tropical storm and hurricane force winds, and then it builds even farther to the north and begins to peter on out just a little bit. On its trek to the north, a large wave field. The waves propagating out from the center. We could be looking at 30, 35, 40-foot waves to the north of Bermuda, and all of that raging north and slamming into Atlantic Canada. How do the models see things here? Well, the GFS and the European are pretty much in total agreement. Look at them right on top of each other as it passes by to the west, northwest of Bermuda, and then slams into portions of Nova Scotia and Labrador and Newfoundland as we get into the upcoming weekend with some major, likely historic impacts. We've also got Tropical Storm Gaston out there, high-end tropical storm right now, very far to the north as well with 65-mile-per-hour winds. It would not surprise me if this also jumps to become a hurricane as well, because satellite presentation is pretty impressive here. You can certainly see that spin, and even there were some signatures of an eye trying to clear on out there. It's not forecast to do so, although it is expected to strengthen a little bit more, up to 70-mile-per-hour winds. That's just below Category 1 status, which you need 74 or greater, so on the threshold of a Category 1 hurricane. So both of these systems, Fiona and Gaston, ending up very far in the North Atlantic. High latitude, usually not an area that will sustain tropical development, but this year's different. We've got abnormally warm North Atlantic sea surface temperatures. Everything in red here is water temperatures that are warmer than 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It's all you need for tropical development and the interaction of the heat exchange between the system and the ocean surface. And you have that. Look at how far north you get that with Fiona's track. And even Gaston's still tapping into it now, but it'll be drifting north and out of it. So very abnormal there. And that's also what sustained Danielle and Earl staying strong for so long as it built off to the north. All right, let's talk about Invest 98L. Right now, 35-mile-an-hour winds still does not look like much at all. A very disorganized cluster of thunderstorms. That's really all it is, an open tropical wave at the moment. But in 2 days, 70% chance of it developing. In 5 days, it's got a 90% chance of developing here. Right now, it's really combating some wind shear coming in from Fiona's outflow, which I'll show you in a second. But this area looks very familiar, doesn't it? Because remember, Bonnie, our second named storm of the season, was in this exact same spot. There's the plot of Bonnie's track. Here's where the current location is of Invest 98L. Bonnie was forecast to develop, and it struggled significantly with land interaction. This is South America here. And it just never got its act together. I will say I don't expect this to be a repeat of Bonnie. The overall environmental conditions in the Caribbean are much different than where it was for Bonnie when that was around. That was back earlier in the season. So I do expect 98L to develop, and likely to develop quickly once, in fact, it gets into those prime environmental conditions. Here's a look at visible satellite imagery. You can see that there is some shear being imparted from the north, and that is because of Fiona. Such a strong storm, we've got the outflow channels lifting to the north and then diving south in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and that is driving northerly winds aloft, tilting 98L over. So until it's able to stand up straight, it's going to have a really tough time holding together until it moves out of that wind shear and into that very fertile environment. That northerly wind shear is also pulling in some drier air. There's not an overall closed circulation here, so that dry air isn't doing much to it at the moment. So we've got the sea surface temperatures that are more than warm enough. 80 degrees or warmer, as I mentioned. These are all numbers that are in the upper 80s. So plenty of warm water, and that's deep warm water as well. So when storms get going, especially when it gets into this area, when it's likely going to be a bona fide tropical storm or hurricane at that point, it's going to be mixing up the ocean, something called upwelling. When that happens, if the warm water is only on the skin of the ocean, it's going to mix it up and pull up colder waters from a depth. When you've got the deep warm water, you just have an endless supply of warm water. So once it gets out here, and some of these ocean heat content areas, the deepest, warmest water is located in the western portions of the Caribbean, in the entire basin, and that's where it's likely forecast to track. So why all the big to-do about this tropical wave? Everybody's talking about it, thinking it's going to be this big storm, right? Well, that's because of where it's heading into an environment that's so fertile for it to develop and develop quickly is what is so worrisome. So the Caribbean Sea now features extremely fertile environmental conditions for tropical growth. What am I talking about here? Well, moist mid-levels, there's a lack of dry air as you get farther to the west in the Caribbean. There's an abundance of warm sea surface temperatures, and a lot of that warm water extends down a great depth. Also very permissive for these storms to develop. Low wind shear and a favorable positioning of an upper level high. Why that's extremely important is that it allows divergence aloft. You've got convergence at the surface with the low pressure, rising air, and then divergence aloft. If you have a high pressure system placed over that developing system, the ventilation helps to evacuate the air and away from the system, helping it more efficiently ventilate and breathe. When you have all of these checked off, development would be likely. So if development does occur, this storm would likely be a very significant one to watch as it moves through the Caribbean. All right, how do the models see things? As we've talked about time and time again, usually in the short term, there's good model consensus, and then you get a divergence, a growing divergence. The farther out in time you get, confidence drops. Because look at the spread here. These are all of our different computer models. Each line here, we call this the spaghetti plots, goes from the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos, all the way into Honduras. It's a large spread. Confidence is low at this point in time. That's about 5 to 6 days out. How about the GFS ensemble members? 30 members is the GFS model run 30 different times, changing that variable slightly. Even that has a massive spread, very similar to what we just saw on all the other computer models. So a lot is still up in the air. Now let's compare the GFS and the European. What you're looking at here are the two models, isobars. Each line is an isobar, lines of equal pressure. When you see them closed and packed tightly together, that is a strong system. GFS will be in yellow, European will be in red. So let's jump out all the way to this upcoming weekend as this system has now moved all the way into the Caribbean. It's in that fertile environment. Now it's taking advantage of all those key ingredients to grow and flourish. The GFS has a strong storm. Notice those tightly packed isobars. That's the GFS. European is a little bit farther to the east at this point, but strengthening it as well. Jumping out to Monday and Tuesday, both models disagree on exact location, but show intensification. European passing over the Cayman Islands, which is interesting because yesterday the GFS was in this exact location. Now the GFS is parked a little bit farther to the west and more intense at this time. Let's jump out another day to Wednesday. Both models lift the storm to the north. The European passes over the western part of Cuba and is now in the Florida Straits just south of Miami and Key West. The GFS has it north of the Yucatan Peninsula in the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico at this point. We'll go out to Thursday and end it there, September the 29th. European shows a landfall in South Florida and then re-emerging out in the Atlantic coast of Florida. GFS hangs it back and intensifies it, taking advantage of the very warm Gulf of Mexico and overall conducive conditions as well. From there, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But this is where both models take things as we jump out over a week from now. This is not set in stone. This will certainly change. It has changed just to compare with yesterday's model runs. So we'll see how the model trends play on out. Anyways, where Invest 98L is currently located, it's very rare to get storms developing at that low of a latitude. Bonnie struggled, and that's one of the storms that developed from that area. That's it. So we've had 10 systems, 1 Category 4 developed at that location, 3 Category 2, 5 tropical storms, and 1 tropical depression. This goes back all the way to the 1850s, so a long duration of time, and you only get 10 systems out of that low latitude. So it'll be interesting to see how this picks on up a northern component to it and lifts its way off to the north. All right, here's a look at where we are in terms of where 98L is currently located, how long it might take for that system to reach the United States. I think we're in anywhere from 7 to 9 days out. A lot of time to still watch this as it tracks its way on off to the west. Areas that are watching it currently, Trinidad and Tobago dealing with some of that tropical wave action, some heavy rainfall there. Grenada, the Grenadines, St. Vincent, driving over to the ABC Islands, Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire, maybe down the line here by Saturday and into Sunday, and even farther down the line, Cayman Islands, Jamaica, and even potentially Belize, Honduras, and Nicaragua here, depending on where it tracks, how far north or south it does go. So we're going to be up to our next couple names here, Hermine or Ian. Now, it would not surprise me if one of the other waves gets its act together sooner and gets the name Hermine, and we see Invest 98L get the name Ian. Why that's interesting to me is that with I-named storms, they are the names. I'm not going to say that this is going to be the storm that gets retired or anything like that, but I-named storms are the most retired. They've been retired 11 times. So it would just kind of fall into line there that if we see Ian, we'll see how significant it does become as it heads into the Caribbean. So until next time, I know there was a lot that we just went through, but until next time, you can find me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. I'm also on TikTok at Tim Talk Weather. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.